Good afternoon, my friends. This is Eladamri, the Lord of Leaves. Only joking, it's still the Grimflayer. I still hope you're doing very well today. I just had to get a little bit in character, but fear not, it's still me. But we are playing Elves, and we are playing Pauper. For the first time ever on the channel, I have brought you one Pauper video before. It was my first time ever playing the format, just recording some burn games in the practice lobby, right? No stakes, but this is my first time ever playing Pauper Elves in any capacity on the channel, and it's also my first time bringing you Pauper League gameplay on the channel, so a couple of historic firsts, and Elves in general are just such a feel-good deck for me thematically. For those who don't know, I used to be a kitchen table casual for the vast majority of my Magic playing career, all the way back to the 3rd grade in elementary school, and it was only three and a half years ago, I guess now, how time flies, that my friends and I jumped into Modern, and when we did so, Elves, Green-Black Elves, started as mono-green, became green-black, were the first ever kitchen table deck I ported into Modern. Now, sadly, their best days are not currently in vogue in Modern. Their best days may be behind them. They're not that well positioned, but in Pauper, they are much more of a force to be reckoned with, and we also have access, we certainly lack access to some powerful Modern uncommons and rares like Elvish Archdruid, Collected Company, Shaman of the Pack, but we have a lot of really, legacy-powered elf cards, too, like Birchlore Rangers, Quirion Ranger, Priest of Titania, right? So this is kind of a really explosive, really fun deck, and this is actually a donation league for a wonderful supporter, Marc-Andre Kurasinski, and I've got to give Mark all the credit in the world here, because I know that he's basically exclusively a Modern Jund player, and I also know that he hasn't even been playing Jund really at all lately, yet he is still a wonderful supporter of the channel. I think he, like many of us, are not the most pleased by the current state of Modern, and so Mark is doing other things with his gaming time, but he's still a big fan of the channel, and he's still generous enough to be a supporter. And he came up for a donation league, and we talked a little bit about Jund, but never really got too much further with that. And then Mark comes back and says, hey, do whatever you want for the donation league, whatever you want to play is good with me. And I said, are you sure, my friend? Because I know you like Modern Jund, and if you give me carte blanche, I'm gonna play Pauper Elves. And he said, once again, whatever you want. So, round of applause for Mark. What a guy, what a guy. And we're playing Elves in your name, my friend. And yeah, so let's take a little look at the deck list here, and then we'll get into our lead. So for those who don't know, Elves are an extremely explosive tribal deck. We have only 14 lands, and one of them is an island, which you'll note can't cast much of relevance, especially early on. And so basically we have 13 lands that we're trying to operate off of right out of the gates. Despite that, we produce mana like nobody's business, and that is because all 16 of these 1-drops in this category right here are all mana dorks. We have your traditional tap to add green, but we also have stuff like the aforementioned Birchlore and Quirion Rangers that really do the more esoteric type of ramping, the more unconventional and higher upside, but perhaps more conditional as well, style of ramping. We also have some more 1-drop utility spells, Viridian Longbow for getting through fog effects or big board states, or for just gunning down the opponent's board if we have a ton of mana in a wide board. Nettle Sentinel, whose tap and untap shenanigans are very powerful with things like Birchlore Rangers and Viridian Longbow. Essence Warden, just for some life gain because aggro and burn are definitely very prevalent in the format. And the ETB life gain is very nice because unlike with Wellwisher, you do not have to untap with Essence Warden to start gaining life. We also have Priest of Titania for insane amounts of mana generation. It might look like a little bit of overkill to you, but we can really put all of this excess mana to great use. So that's how we set up in the first couple turns, and that's how we go wide. But how do we actually win? Well, we're going very, very, very wide, so oftentimes you can just kind of win by suiciding in with a bunch of 1/1s and 1/2s and so forth, but we have other more powerful ways to win as well. We go tall with a card like Elvish Vanguard, and we also go tall with Timberwatch Elf activations, very, very strong, and the aforementioned Wellwisher is basically just a win condition in her own right against aggressive decks, because if we're gaining 100 life, the opponent is never realistically going to kill us, so often that will be sufficient to concede, or at least sufficient to deterministically let us find the board state we need to get the win, right? Sylvan Ranger is kind of a cute one of, often she will tutor for our missing island to get our blue spells online. Birchlore Rangers is the other way besides finding that island to cast blue spells. And also just a 2-for-1, just thinning out the deck a little bit, making a land drop in a deck that doesn't always make its land drops, to say the least. Finally, rounding out the creature suite at the top end is Lys Alana Huntmaster, which is just an on-cast trigger making a token off of a 3/3 body as a baseline. So the 3/3 base body is very nice. The on-cast trigger is even better. These tokens just swarm the battlefield and play well with every other card that I just mentioned. And rounding out the main deck, we have 4 copies of Lead the Stampede, which is usually a 3-mana draw 3 or draw 4. And with our excess mana production, we can really, it's not just good card advantage, we can also deploy things the same turn we cast this most of the time. And Distant Melody as a 3 of, with the 4th copy in the side for grindy matchups. This card, you can make it a draw 15 a lot of the time. It's really, really crazy. It's the primary incentive to splash blue. So I have made a couple tweaks to my own specifications, but generally this is a list that I've designed, and I've been taking cues from other 5-0 lists and from my own experience. Moving on to the sideboard, where things get a little bit more off course, partially because sideboards vary more than main decks anyway, but partially because I've done something a little bit unconventional. So, starting with the more conventional things, we have Scattershot Archer and Lys Alana Bowmaster against flying decks, Weather the Storm against Burn, Gleeful Sabotage against Bogles and Affinity and maybe some other decks, Spidersilk Armor to buff our creatures with a defensive attribute, getting them around Electrickery and also potentially helping against flying decks as well, and Relic of Progenitus, which is good against Tron, good against a lot of the blue-based control decks, good against Gurmag Angler decks, of course good against anything else that's more all-in on the graveyard. 4th Distant Melody, as we've mentioned, a 1 of Prohibit. I see up to 3 of these in sideboards, but for me, and maybe this is because I'm new to the format, I find myself often wanting 1 and almost never wanting to side in 2, because it's reactive, it's conditional in more than one way. It's conditional whether it lines up against what the opponent's doing, but it's also conditional whether we'll have that blue mana. And I also am leery of diluting the threat count after any given sideboarding plan. So to that end, I'm down to 1 Prohibit, but I think the card's fine. I like Blue Elemental Blast, and I might play a second Blue Elemental Blast over a second Prohibit if I had room for that, but right now I don't feel that I do. But obviously this card's amazing against red decks. But what I'm doing that's unconventional is playing 3 copies of Thermokarst, because here's the thing. Most elf decks in the last 3-4 months that I saw that got published do not play this card, but it's not unheard of. It used to see more play, again, based on my research a little while ago, 4 months or so ago. And I don't exactly know why it fell out of favor, but I do know that all the chatter I'm hearing is that Tron is the clear best deck in the format. And I also know that I'm brand new to the format, I'm inexperienced, and I'm not necessarily going to have the best possible nuanced sideboarding against Tron. And if you're not playing land destruction, your sideboarding against a deck like Tron is definitely, by definition, going to have to be more nuanced. And on top of that, I understand that Tron can be built in a variety of different ways, and I won't necessarily recognize exactly what they're up to. So all of those things factored in, I decided I'm going to innovate by reaching into the past a little bit and trying out Thermokarst, and we'll see how it goes. Hey, we're going to get this off on turn 2 a lot of the time, and if we can just Stone Rain them a time or 2 very early and then race, I think that's as good a plan as any. But you guys, let me know about that. Anyway, that's the elf deck. That's what we're up to. Now guys, we're going to jump right into some gameplay, but I do have to let you know that this is going to be replay, and it's also going to be some selected games from 2 different leagues. So I've played 2 leagues with this deck, and I'm going to show you some of the games from both of those leagues, and maybe even a little bit extra beyond that. But the reason for that is I've been at this long enough that I know when content is good and when it's not so good. And frankly, both of these leagues were extremely ugly to watch almost every single loss that I had went all the way down on the clock, like with the opponent having 3 minutes or less on the clock. Almost every single time. It was just not good content. It just wasn't good content. Again, I've been at this long enough to tell the difference, so I think you, the viewer, will benefit from me modifying this into a replay form, but we'll do a wrap-up at the end, and I'll tell you how both of the leagues went, and definitely will cover all of the bases. I'll explain what happened in the matchups that we didn't see. So let's jump right in, and let's say thank you once again to Mark, and thank you as well to our 2 newest Patreon supporters. We have Confidant named Zachary. Welcome to the fold, Zachary. And we have a new Inquisitor named Staffin Ginemo. Hope I got your name somewhere close to correct, my friend. Thanks, one and all patrons. I love you guys, and without further ado, it's time for some Pauper Elves. We have lost the die roll here in round 1, my friends, and the hand is keepable, but it's not without its risks. We only have 1 land, and we only have Llanowar Elves to ramp, so if we are staring down removal, and we also fail to draw more dorks and or a second land, we could end up stuck, but we're a 14 land deck. I think we're supposed to keep most hands like this, and look at this. My first thought, we see Forest into Quirion Ranger, the newfangled printing, not the old one that I like. My first thought, obviously, is, well, a mirror match. Here we go. Here we go. A mirror match seems like a bad place to be for an inexperienced player like me. And we lost the die roll, so I've got the doom and gloom mindset right away, but then I'm totally surprised, and happily so, I guess, to see the opponent play a distinctly non-elven card, Burning Tree Emissary into Vault Scourge into Nettle Sentinel. So this is some kind of a zoo deck. Maybe this is mono green aggro, which I've heard bandied about, but I simply don't know. I would imagine it's something like that, though. But the opponent has an extremely explosive start. However, we've drawn a second land, which is actually really nice, because prior to this, we had a real tension between what to do, but now we get to play Essence Warden to lead off our turn 2, and of course the opponent is kind of a linear aggro deck as far as I can tell so far. Therefore, Essence Warden is going to be putting in a ton of work, including with our second spell of the turn, and Priest of Titania, of course, is the card we really wanted to resolve to have a great turn 3. So we're just basically praying to dodge any removal that they might play. Pretty happy to take this hit for 5, and as long as we get to untap with our board, right? So opponent will follow up with another Vault Scourge, and that's all they've got. So time to go off. We've drawn Wellwisher. So I'm going to lead on the Wellwisher, and either, no matter what we play first, we kind of have to play something, or we kind of want to play something, I should say, in order to make Priest of Titania tap for 4. Having done that, we want to get the Huntmaster down as soon as possible, because the earlier we play that card, the more tokens we get to make, right? So this is a nice variety, too. We've got 1 each of all of our big payoff cards. We've got the life gain from Wellwisher, the go wide and natural big body of Huntmaster, and of course the pump of Timberwatch Elf. So we have done it. The opponent goes to their turn, they start tapping to cast a spell, and then they just say, we can't beat that board. And so this is what I mean in the deck tech, if we had just if we even just had the Huntmaster and the Timberwatch Elf, that would be really, really strong, and then maybe some other dorks at the lower end of our curve. But maybe the opponent can play it out. Maybe they can try to, chump block while their Vault Scourges get in for lifelink in the air to extend the game, and try to find whatever tech they would need to find to beat the Timberwatch Elf or to beat the other cards. But the power of those cards plus the extremely deterministic value to our life total from both Essence Warden and Wellwisher means that our opponent's aggro deck simply has no outs, at least in game 1, or at least with what they drew. So with this matchup, as with all of them, my friends, take my sideboarding with a grain of salt, because as I said, these were my first ever Pauper Elf leagues. I did very conservative sideboarding here. Basically, we have, where is it? I just lost it. I was just looking at it. Where are you? Where are you? What did I cut? Yes, okay. I cut one Lead the Stampede simply because it's a little bit slow, and I brought in one copy of Prohibit because it seems fine in the matchup. Other than that, we don't really have any tech for like a mono-green aggro deck based on what I saw there. We could play Scattershot Archer and Lys Alana Bowmaster against the Vault Scourges, but I opted not to. I opted to keep the explosiveness of our mana, and of course the life gain I rate more highly than just about anything else here. It's possible we should have sideboarded more aggressively to make room for this stuff, but I just don't know their deck well enough. For all I know, the Scourges are the only flyers they play, so I didn't want something that was too narrow, and I wasn't certain of when I think our matchup is really, really good to begin with. But again, I make the caveat that I could be wrong. Opponent leads on Viridian Longbow, not something I was expecting to see, using her own technology against us, and of course, if they can find a creature and make 3 land drops, this is going to start gunning down our board. So with that in mind, what do we do? Well, to me, there were 2 options here. We could say, okay, let's just kind of hope that they don't have it, like they don't make the 3rd land drop, basically, and we start going wide now. Or we can play really, really cautiously. Maybe we play out the Sylvan Ranger as a bit of a sacrificial lamb to ensure our 3rd land drop, and then we can start playing Timberwatch Elves that'll survive. And that was a bit of a toss-up. I said, you know what, let's make him have it, specifically because Essence Warden will at least get some value along the way, kind of by definition, even if they do get on the longbow plan, right? So, back to the opponent. Burning Tree Emissary, we gain a life, and then they play a 2nd Viridian Longbow. Okay, don't really care so much about that unless the game goes really, truly long. We've made our 3rd land drop. I decide to play out the Sylvan Ranger anyway, just because now I know that we have the Timberwatch Elf plan lined up, and I want to make 5 land drops, so on turn 5 I can go Vanguard into Timberwatch Elf, and if they're tapped out, then the Vanguard 2 will survive the Viridian Longbow. So, again, running out a couple of sacrificial lambs here, trying to set up for the mid-game. And we are pretty lucky, because we have a very high density of natural 1/1s in the deck, or just X1s in general. So we're lucky to have all these Timberwatch Elves around that do naturally survive a Viridian Longbow hit. And we've drawn the 5th land as well, so our plan is going pretty well until the opponent rips a Savage Swipe, which is going to pump the Burning Tree, allow it to kill the Timberwatch Elf, and then they crack in for 4. So they're also making land drops as well. We are a little bit scared of the prospect maybe of 2 creatures, each with a longbow, but again, they only have 2 cards left in hand. They need 2 more lands and a creature for that. It's not something we can really play around anyway, so we just kind of have to get on the Timberwatch Elf plan, and hey, I'm happy that we've hit lands, but land number 6 is not exactly something we need, so a really odd progression on both sides. Sylvan Ranger gets gunned down, opponent's playing a Rancor, alright, don't really care about that. And then we draw Prohibit, so Prohibit, definitely a strong card in this spot, but I don't think we can pass up the opportunity to get our Vanguard down while their creature's tapped out. So we go Vanguard into Timberwatch Elf, and then we're just playing cautiously. We keep this Timberwatch Elf untapped to protect against removal, and if we get to untap with both, I don't know what they could have to beat us, and they take their draw step, they scoop it up. So a tale of 2 games in that in game 1, we did the elf ball thing and it was way too hot for the opponent to handle. In game 2, we really didn't. We had a slow progression, and that was true even if they hadn't been gunning down our 1/1s with a longbow on the play. And that, of course, just made matters worse. Nevertheless, again, we were lucky enough to draw some X2s, and the power of Timberwatch Elf basically meant that the opponent still didn't really have any way out, despite the very much less impressive progression that we put on here in Game 2. So, anyway, my friends, a very easy win here in the first game of this video, the first match, rather, of this video. And again, I would say mono green aggro, pretty good matchup for Elves, right? Alright guys, once again on the draw here in round 2, but we've got a very explosive hand. We've got 4 mono dorks off of 1 land, now 5, having drawn a 3rd copy of Birchlore Rangers, and we can go tall with the Vanguard, and we can refuel with Lead the Stampede. So it's a pretty strong hand, and the opponent has played 2 copies of Tranquil Cove and just said go. So, what do we do here? Well, this was actually a really interesting decision. So basically, as you can see, I play the Priest of Titania. That's one option. Another option that would let us technically have a more mana-efficient turn this turn is to just go Birchlore Rangers into Birchlore Rangers into Birchlore Rangers using the first 2 that we play, tapping to add green for the third one. So that would technically be more mana efficient, but I'm thinking if we get to untap with Priest of Titania, number 1, I don't exactly know what I'm up against. You know, getting her down under counter magic might be very relevant, if indeed this blue-white deck might be representing that. And number 2, we can, if nothing else, you know, let's say we don't draw anything else relevant next turn, we can start with that same exact line, Rangers into Rangers into Rangers, and then we're tapping the Priestess for 5 mana. So that was my reasoning there, but I don't know. I think you could make a case either way, but we see Urza's Tower, then the opponent says go, so we are against Tron. So let's try to go wide, see if our stuff resolves, and take it from there. So we go Birchlore into Dork, into another Birchlore, and then, as mentioned, tapping the Priest for 5. And I chose to go Lead the Stampede over Elvish Vanguard here, reasoning that a lot of draws allow us to combo off pretty hard from here, and also it's just kind of a higher ceiling card. There's definitely an argument for Vanguard, you know, coming down the sooner the better, right? But we're pretty rewarded, I would say, because Lead not only resolves, but nets us a draw for, including a couple of mana dorks, one of which we can cast. So after having resolved that, I do decide to get the Vanguard down, start trying to go tall, and also play Fyndhorn Elves. So a couple notes just on some of the specific sequencing there. Number 1, cards like Echoing Truth and Echoing Decay exist in the format. So when you can afford to, it makes sense to diversify the names on the field. Llanowar Elves, Fyndhorn Elves, and Elvish Mystic are all functionally the same card. But just in case they play an echoing effect, you might as well have one of each rather than 2 of Llanowar Elves if you remember to do that. Another thing, look at all these beautiful old bordered cards. This is literally like my dream come true as far as playing a deck goes, but I just have to make an aesthetic note. Fyndhorn Elves is the only card that I could have gotten an old bordered card for that I chose not to because I just love this art too much. Far superior to the Fallen Empires version or whatever it is, in my opinion. Anyway, aesthetics aside, back to the Tron player. They're finally going to cast a spell, and it's a very good couple of spells, actually, because Muldrifter cast for Evoke, but with Evoke trigger on the stack, they play Ephemerate, which is a really nice way to cheat it in and get a bunch of card advantage. But speaking of advantage, look at our board state, look at our hand. We've got a lot of really fun things to do this turn. So I'm going to start off by just playing a few dorks basically for free before we tap the Priest. And we get another Lead the Stampede, which is another draw for, so leads have been really, really great here. And there's nothing that we find that's overly insane, but Elvish Vanguard, definitely pretty good, and we will indeed lead on that. And I'm pretty sure we can very easily just dump out our entire hand here, including making yet more card advantage in the form of Sylvan Ranger going to get our blue land in case we should ever need that. But for now, we actually use Quirion Ranger to untap, bounce our forest, loop, and dump out the whole hand, replay the forest, and start turning our board sideways. There's no real reason not to. We can afford the loss of a single brave Birchlore Rangers in order to get, what was that, 14 damage across? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 creatures on board. None of them are even tokens off of only one land. That's Elves for you. What more can I say? So opponent gets their rebounded Ephemerate. Muldrifter will draw 2. They've got 9 cards in hand, so we're just afraid of like a random like one of Sweeper maybe or something like that, but they perhaps dig for that with Prophetic Prism. We're also of course afraid of something maybe like Stonehorn Dignitary to shut off the attack step, but whatever they found off of Prism was not sufficient to stem the tide of the Elves. So We will not always, catch Tron without the relevant ways to stall the game, but we did here, and we put together a really overwhelming turn 5 kill that, just like a few pieces of interaction were nowhere near sufficient to stop. Alright guys, so sideboarding against blue-white Tron. As you can see, I have 5 cards out, and the cards that came in were the 3 copies of the Spice, Thermokarst, 1 copy of Relic of Progenitus, and 1 copy of Prohibit, whereas I have moved away from the life gain mostly, leaving 1 Wellwisher in, but cutting 2 of them, cutting the Essence Warden, and also cutting 2 Timberwatch Elves, because of course a big way the blue-based Tron deck stay alive is by fogging in some way, shape, or form, so the Timberwatch Elves can be a little a little, clunky relative to how helpless they are in the face of that, those Tron loops, and that is my plan. As you can see, I did not side in Gleeful Sabotage, even though there are some targets for it. I don't know if that's correct or not. When I'm not sure, and I'm learning the format, and I'm learning the deck, I am erring on the side of keeping more elves in. It is more proactive and more synergistic. So if I'm not sure, I leave the non-creature spells out, and in this case, I was not sure, but you guys can let me know as always. And would you look at this? Do you guys see the combo? Do you see the plan? Do you see the line? I do. It's turn 1 Mystic, turn 2 Thermokarst. That is right. Eternal format staple Thermokarst. And look at that, we draw another one off the top. So obviously this is pretty sweet. We just kind of have to fade permission and really hope that we just lock them out this way. And we've drawn Fyndhorn Elves, so there is a non-zero consideration for playing a dork and playing Priest of Titania. It'd be a really good ramp turn, but I cannot resist the urge to try the turn 2 Stone Rain in the Pauper format. Opponent jukes us out with some feigned permission, but in the end, they just have to let it resolve. Urza's mind goes down. I actually wasn't 100% sure there that I was supposed to hit the Tron land, but I figured I probably should, and then because they play another Tranquil Cove, I'm very happy that I did. We've drawn another Lys Alana Huntmaster. Not a great draw here, but here is the example of how Quirion Ranger is so good. So, at first glance, the ramp ability of the Ranger is not necessarily that obvious. Like, it's great if you have a Priest of Titania online to untap her, but that's pretty win more, right? Well, it can still be very relevant, but yes, in some ways it is win more, but this is also as good or often better than a traditional mana dork if you don't have a land drop to make on the turn you play it, because you get to play it, and you also get to ramp with it like a traditional mana dork could not, even on its own. And then when you combine it with an Elvish Mystic or other traditional mana dork, you're basically getting 2 hasty mana dorks in one. I didn't explain that probably the most articulately, but I hope you understand what I'm saying, and I just demonstrated it here. So we tap a forest to play the Ranger, and then we tap Mystic to float mana, and then we bounce the tap forest and get to redeploy it for turn. So we've basically used this summoning sick creature to ramp by 2 green, while also developing our board. Very, very nice, and with that all that floated mana, we get a Huntmaster down. So we're not really accelerating that much more than we were with our mana, but again, getting the Huntmaster down, the earlier the better, right? And more importantly, the Tron player fails to make a 3rd land drop, so our Thermokarst has kept them on 2 lands. Obviously, we're pretty lucky to have drawn these Thermokarsts off of a really functional 7, and we're pretty lucky that they're hurting the opponent this badly, right? So I'm going to begin on the Priest, and this was actually a calculated move to see, okay, it's good if it resolves. It's also fine if it draws out counter magic, because again, we are very far ahead given their lack of a land drop. And with that in mind, I do decide to just, even though it's only a duplicate Tranquil Cove, take the turn to Stone Rain them again, and we've got a board state now. We're smashing in for 4, and that is good enough for me. So back to the opponent. They failed to make a land drop. Obviously, this is pretty sweet. We continue abusing the Quirion Ranger while landlocked synergy with Elvish Mystic, and we get to play another Huntmaster into another Fyndhorn Elves, making a bunch of free tokens, going very, very wide. And if you do the math here, after our attack connects, the opponent is taking exactly lethal next turn. So they realize that as well. Or even if they don't do the math, it's pretty hopeless, isn't it? So there you go, guys. Some pretty good luck against Tron. Again, in Game 1, they didn't have the Fog Effect or the Stonehorn Dignitary or whatever it would have been. And here in Game 2, we were lucky to open on the Turn 2 Thermokarst progression and to draw a second one, and for that to be really, really impactful. So, again, I make no claims to expertise, but hey, the spicy inclusion, the innovation, if you will, definitely pulling us into free win territory just about here in Game 2. The Elf Ball strategy, very, very effective against Tron, of course, when they're not operating on their full land count. Alright, third round, my friends, and we have a 1-die roll for the first time in these games, and that's the only reason I'm keeping this. I think I would probably mull it on the draw. On the play, I'm just about able to keep it. I think it's definitely slow to have no turn 1 play whatsoever. We have 20 of them in the deck. But the hand functions, and, on the play, we can ramp, hopefully, with turn 2 Priest into a decent turn 3, right? That's the idea. So, back to the opponent, and they go turn 1 Forest into Utopia Sprawl. And we draw our 1-drop a little bit behind schedule, but that's okay. Birchlore can help us ramp next turn, hopefully, as long as we get to untap with our Priest. So, note that the opponent has named green with the Utopia Sprawl, and also now they're floating green with the Crumbling Vestige ETB. But then they name white with Utopia Sprawl, so I don't know what I'm up against, and they use that to play Aura Gnarlid. Creatures with power less than its power can't block it, and it gets +1/+1 for each aura on the battlefield. So, a big dumb beater, kind of a Tarmogoyf for aura decks, I guess is how I would describe it. And we have drawn Essence Warden, which is probably pretty good in the face of a big dumb beater. So, much as we did in round 1, we will lead off with her, following up with a mana-efficient Wellwisher, putting that island to some use, and then floating 3 with the Priest, playing Birchlore, and using Birchlore's ramp ability to ramp out a Timberwatch Elf, so a very strong turn. It always feels a little bit bad to have Huntmaster as the last card in your hand, because of course you want to play the Huntmaster and then keep going for all of the token value, but we had 3 incentives to sequence that way. Number 1, getting all the Essence Warden triggers we can as soon as we can. Number 2, getting the Wellwisher down ASAP to start gaining life, and number 3, of course, getting the Timberwatch Elf down so that can untap next turn. So it's not like we just played a bunch of inconsequential stuff over the Huntmaster, quite the opposite, right? So back to the opponent, they are just going to town over their Abundant Growth into Wild Growth, into Abundant Growth, into Wild Growth, into Ram Through, which is removals basically contingent upon having a big fat threat on the field, and they use it on our Timberwatch Elf. So that was a really scary turn for the opponent, but after all that, they some of these cards like Abundant Growth have replaced themselves. Some like Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl have not. So they only have 1 card left in hand. They have an 8/8 on the field, which is definitely respectable, but we are gaining life with both Essence Warden and Wellwisher, and even though Quirion Ranger might not look very impressive, when I'm in this type of position, when I have a Wellwisher and a Huntmaster, any elf is very, very welcome, because it's just snowballing all of our existing effects. And here's another really powerful synergy with Quirion Ranger. Let's see what it is. Well, we tap Wellwisher, gain 7 life, and then we untap her, looping a forest to gain another 7 for a total of 14, crack back uncontested for 2, and that is some very strong life gain. Now, it is also worth noting, for those who don't know, that the Ranger can be used on the opponent's turn. It says activate this ability only once each turn. Well, you can do it on the opponent's turn too. I don't remember if I did here. I remember thinking it was kind of unnecessary, and yeah, it proved to be relatively unnecessary. I just don't want to be too egregious with, like, getting cards stuck in hand, because I don't know what I'm up against. I don't want to bounce all of my forests and then have them wipe the board, or just have them, I have made the mistake of in my practice lobby games of holding excess lands or keeping excess lands unnecessarily in hand against like chittering rats that then make me put the land back on top of my deck and basically take away one of my draws or delay one of my draws. Again, am I probably expecting something like that out of this deck? No, but at the same time, I don't really know what I'm up against, and I think we're gaining more than enough life just by activating Wellwisher twice per turn, you know what I mean? So, unfortunately, we do have a brick off the top in the form of Forest, but the opponent, they've been bricking too. You know, they've made land drops, they play a Rancor, which doesn't change much, and Sylvan Ranger is our find. It's not that impressive, but again, any find at all is pretty welcome here at this stage of the game, and we thin out our deck that little bit more, and we continue gaining ungodly amounts of life with Wellwisher. And then at this point, I judge that my board is wide enough where I can start kind of suiciding these creatures in. I choose to leave the Huntmaster back, and we're going to try to end the game because the opponent has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 mana at their disposal. I don't want to find out. I don't want to stick around long enough to find out what they could draw, right? So anyway, we have found Timberwatch Elf. That's a very good find. Again, any elf here is good, but Timberwatch Elf specifically is going to give us lethal next turn, right? So it's a little bit of a schizophrenic approach, you know, like I don't attack for a while, and then I do suicide in once, and then I don't again, but I think the time had come to start turning the corner, but then Timberwatch Elf's presence made me want to wait another turn because there's no reason not to, right, that I can tell. In any case, that was apparently good enough because the opponent scoops it up. And again, don't really know what I'm up against. I'm sure they had plenty of bomb top decks that they just failed to hit. We didn't kill them all that quickly, right? And I don't know if they had too many outs to our wide board, but again, didn't really want to stick around to find out. Alright guys, so against this ramp deck, I kind of trimmed around the edges. I have brought in all 3 copies of Thermokarst, which, with all their, all their ability to stack enchantments on various lands, I think is definitely warranted. And I also brought in 2 copies of Gleeful Sabotage to target enchantments, and I have trimmed a little bit, as I say, around the edges. So we lose an Essence Warden, a Nettle Sentinel, a Viridian Longbow, a Lead the Stampede, and a Lys Alana Huntmaster. Just kind of trimming a little bit from the slower, clunkier top-end stuff, and also a little bit from the lower impact kind of crew of the stuff down at the lower end of the curve. Basically, I'm thinking, let's get our big, recursive, activated abilities online as quickly as possible. So we're keeping all our dorks into ramp, we're keeping Wellwisher, Timberwatch Elf, all that stuff. Again, you could probably make the case for a variety of things. I didn't really know what I was playing against here, and we cannot keep that one lander either, so we have to mulligan. And this is a fine 6. I actually choose to bottom the second land because it's Island. Island, it can help cast Timberwatch Elf, but the big reason we can operate with impunity off of just one forest is, again, Quirion Ranger. So that is my judgment call. And you could, again, definitely make the argument for, like, bottoming a Mystic and keeping the Island, right? But I chose to keep the creature, and we have drawn Gleeful Sabotage. Could be good. Could be good. Let's see. Opponent has gone Utopia Sprawl into another Utopia Sprawl into Glade Cover Scout. Now, I was not expecting this whatsoever. I was expecting to see virtually the only threats be like big bombs, and Glade Cover Scout, definitely the opposite of what I expected to see out of this ramp deck, but with the aura synergies, it does make sense. It does make sense. So, time for our Quirion Ranger Mana Dork trick. Definitely feels great, and you could go a few different ways here. You could, definitely, play a Gleeful Sabotage, slow them down, and I was halfway thinking that until I saw the Glade Cover Scout. Now I'm like, okay, nope, we've got to save it for auras targeting this creature if we can. And then from there, having eliminated that, I thought playing Sylvan Ranger and Elvish Mystic was definitely viable, and when I was newer to the deck, I probably would have. And again, by no means am I experienced, maybe I still should have, but I'm coming to realize that, prioritizing getting Timberwatch Elf down early is definitely nice. I have kind of the value-oriented approach sometimes where I'm like, well, I'm not swinging for lethal yet, so I might as well, get my 2-for-1, get my card advantage with Sylvan Ranger finding another land, make 2 bodies instead of 1. But I actually just said, you know what? making the second land drop, again, not that important as long as Quirion Ranger is around, so let's just get the Timberwatch Elf down. Opponent's turn, and they will play Ancestral Mask, +2/+2, aura for each other enchantment on the battlefield. So Glade Cover Scout is a hexproof 5/5, and we're just going to get hit. And then we've drawn another Quirion Ranger, so time for some loopage, and we will lead on Elvish Mystic into Quirion Ranger. And then it is Gleeful Sabotage time. We get to cast it with Conspire, so we get to tag two things. Obviously, one of them has got to be this Ancestral Mask, and then we'll just get rid of the Utopia Sprawl as well. Pretty strong turn, making two creatures, basically casting 2 disenchants off of 1 card, and attacking for 7 off of a 1 mana ramp piece. Feels good. Feels great, in fact, and my friends, if you are wondering why that was a 7/7 instead of a 6/6, well, Timberwatch Elf counts all elves on the battlefield, and Glade Cover Scout happens to be an elf, so thanks for the assist, my friend. And we're elf balling just like we were meant to. The opponent's got another Ancestral Mask, which is definitely a strong card, but after having resolved that, they move to attacks, they hesitate a bit, and then they just scoop it up because whatever else they've got cooking is not going to be able to beat. I guess Timberwatch Elf is the card they can't beat. Plus, we've got more gas in the tank pretty clearly, right? Because we've never made a second land drop yet. So, opponent has seen enough, and that is great. Still don't exactly know, what all to expect out of a deck like the opponent's. I guess we're calling that deck Mono Green Auras, but I don't know how meta that is. I had never encountered it before. Seems like a pretty fine matchup for us, though. But again, maybe they've got some tech that we just happened to fade that would have really ruined our day, but for our purposes here, it was a nice, easy 2-0. And here we are, my friends, back to losing the die roll, but with a perfectly acceptable keep in a blind game 1. And the opponent mulligans down to 6, which we always love to see. Fyndhorn Elves, opponent will play Azorius Chancery. And sorry, I was just clicking a little bit too fast there. So, rewind a little bit. Opponent plays Azorius Chancery, passes. We get our ramp going with Priest of Titania into Birchlore Rangers. Unfortunately, we don't have any more 1-drops in hand, so that's the extent of our ramp this turn. Back to the opponent, and they will, off of the Chancery, play Sunscape Familiar, which is going to wall off our attacks pretty well as reducing the cost of a lot of what they would like to be up to. So this is the Walls deck. As with anything in this format, I'm not super familiar with it, but I understand the gist of it. And so we make the 3rd land drop, which might allow us a little bit more freedom of play this turn, including the freedom to lead on Lys Alana Huntmaster, which is what I choose to do. So if we lead on Huntmaster, not only is that the best value, it's also really nice with Birchlore Ranger specifically because every token made by the Huntmaster is basically half of a green mana, right? As long as the Rangers are around. So that's a really, really nice synergy there. And we get to go Huntmaster into Wellwisher, and then actually tap down our entire team for an incredible turn 3, finalized by a Lead the Stampede, and all of it is resolved. I was a little bit worried. They've only got 1 mana open, but they could be representing some kind of 2 mana permission here, but fortunately all of our stuff resolves. Unfortunately, we end up bottoming a Distant Melody while only hitting 2 low-impact cards. Llanowar Elves and Wellwisher is just kind of more of the same of what we already have. But, again, any elf helps, especially when the go-wide plan is live, so now we have to, as in round 2 against Tron, hope they don't have the means to stop our go-wide plan. Opponent kicks it off with Deep Analysis. It's a 3-mana draw 2 that can be flashbacked for 1 mana, both of those costs reduced by the Familiar. And then Snap, which is a really brutal card to face in that deck, right? Super brutal card because they've got the ability to make this basically, it's kind of like when a Storm deck makes Monomorphose into a ramp spell. Kind of the same energy here going on with Snap. And of course it's card disadvantage, but they have card advantage from other sources, including this flashbacked Deep Analysis and a Seagate Oracle, making our attacks that much worse. So with that in mind, let's just try to rebuild. They have snapped back our Huntmaster, Timberwatch Elf. These are the cards we need to get back down. And then Wellwisher and Llanowar Elves from our Lead the Stampede. So it's a pretty nice turn, you know. I was not exactly sure how much the life gain mattered here. I assume they have win conditions that are not oriented around that, but we were not attacking for all that much anyway, so I said, okay, at least one turn. Let's wait and see if they have another snap or some other way to deal with the Timberwatch Elf. Let's just gain the life while the life gain is good. Let's not suicide in quite yet. Didn't think it was quite necessary. Didn't think it would make the difference there between the win and the loss, right? So opponent will start off with Ash Barrens, and then sure enough, they have found their Stonehorn Dignitary, so down goes our ability to aggro them out. So all we can do is keep trying to play off the top of our deck. Huntmaster, again, it's a strong card. It is also kind of just more of the same. We gain up to 96 life with 3 Wellwisher activations, so even when we're in the face of some stuff that's not going our way, you know, we're still doing elf ball things, a casual 96 points of life. No big deal, but opponents really doing their thing too. Mnemonic Wall to buy back Snap. Snap especially good alongside Azorius Chancery, basically spending 1 mana to get 3 while also tempoing us out of this Timberwatch Elf. And Preordain is going to help them keep digging. They find another Sunscape Familiar. So even though they're tapped out, we cannot keep our Timberwatch Elf around for a turn where it matters. So trying to pray for a bomb off the top here. Sadly, it's just another Llanowar Elf. Again, we're nice and wide. We're gaining all the life there is to gain. And we can turn them all sideways here if we want to. And I think we do want to. You know, we're going to lose a couple elves, but at this point our board is so wide, we've got to take any open attack we can get. So we hit the opponent down to 8. Notably, they would not be dead even if we had attacked the other turn. I think we would have done like 4 damage or something like that. I'd need to look back. But, you know, we are making the opponent have some stuff, but Mnemonic Wall, again, Snap, again, Muldrifter. So this is what the opponent's up to. They also typed oops in the chat during this, and so I assume maybe they had an even better turn than what we're seeing, but they're drawing a million cards, they're ephemerating their Stonehorn Dignitary, they're buying things back with Mystic Sanctuary. Even if they missequenced in some way, shape, or form, it's still incredibly effective against what we're up to. By the way, guys, can I just offer a little bit of a tangential commentary here for you? There's probably no card that I was more disappointed to see when I started playing Pauper than Mystic Sanctuary. Literally no card. Like, I'm in the commons only world, and it's all new and exciting, and I'm having all kinds of fun, and then I'm like, oh yeah, this card is a common. Hate playing against it in Modern, and yes, I can confirm that I also hate playing against it in Pauper. Just saying. So, we are basically locked out by the Stonehorn Dignitary and all of the buyback potential with their deck. They've got the loops going as soon as they can untap. I'm sure we're pretty much deterministically locked out. We have got to pray for a complete bomb off the top. And basically we're looking for like a distant melody to draw a million cards and find a Viridian Longbow. Or we're just looking for Viridian Longbow off the top. So this was the top deck of absolute dreams. Obviously, the idea here is that it doesn't matter if our attack step is shut off. If we can make a million mana off of Priest of Titania and all of our other mana sources and pass the longbow around and just ping the opponent to death. However, with only 1 mana open, off of the freaking Mystic Sanctuary, the opponent casts a Prohibit, and that's just basically, that was our only real out. So now, again, I'm going to play it out because I don't know, you know, this was my first time really being on the receiving end of this blue-white walls flicker deck going off, I'm just going to hit play here. I think it's not spoiling very much to say that we will lose this game, but I'll show you, basically I'm thinking, well, if nothing else, we're at 156 life. The opponent's going to mill out before we do, so why don't we make them show us a win condition, even though they are definitely and deterministically locking out our combat step from here on out. So opponent doing all their stuff, and Mystic Sanctuary playing a very big role, and then here comes the win con. So they've got Sage's Road Denizen, and to that, I play it out for a little longer, but I'll just hit pause here because ultimately we can scoop to this. So whenever another blue creature enters the battlefield under your control, they're going to mill us. So as they're looping, as they're locking us out, they're also going to mill us out. And that is basically going to do it. We can't really beat that as far as I can tell. So a bit of a tough one for sure. And the chatter that I've heard that I kind of referenced in the deck tech that a lot of people are saying they don't like Ghostly Flicker. They think this card specifically is a problem, or they think some other cards in the Ghostly Flicker decks are a problem. Now, I am not going to make any proclamations with any kind of authority because these were my first ever Pauper leagues that you're seeing glimpses of here. But I will say that just from a subjective play enjoyment standpoint, I would literally rather lose, getting 7 for 1 to buy an Electrickery than losing to the Ghostly Flicker decks. Personally, this has been the least enjoyable gameplay that I've experienced thus far in Pauper, but your mileage may vary. I'd love to know from the experienced Pauper players what you think about the state of these Flicker decks. Are they too strong? And should play enjoyment be the tipping point in considering a ban for them if maybe the power level wouldn't be quite bad enough on its own? Again, I'm still new to the format. I don't know. You let me know, but the Flicker deck certainly put us on our place here in this game 1. Alright, so I followed basically the same sideboard plan against here as I did against Tron. We're moving away from life gain and from Timberwatch Elves, and we are moving into Thermokarst, which maybe not quite as effective here as it is against Tron, but they do play those Karoo lands. They do play Azorius Chancery or whatever it's called, and, just Stone Raining them might be more effective than some other things we're doing, right? So the Thermokarst, the Prohibit, and the Relic all come in, and we are on the play, and we've got a very explosive hand, but one without a payoff. I do decide to keep it because on the play, I wager that aggroing them out with 1/1s is actually pretty realistic, and even though it might seem a little bit loose in some ways to keep hands without a real payoff, I don't necessarily think that it is. Why don't we take a diversion to talk about that? Alright, so just real quick before we carry on with that game, 4 Elvish Vanguard, 2 Timberwatch Elf, 4 Lead the Stampede, 3 Distant Melody, 4 Lys Alana Huntmaster. These are the really meaningful top decks that are bombs. Viridian Longbow also probably counts. So if we count Viridian Longbow, that's 1, 4, 2 of these are sided out. Wow, 1, 4 is 5, plus 2 is 7, 2 of them being sided out that we won't count, 11, 14. And then 3 copies of Lys Alana Huntmaster is 17. So back to the game, even though, again, it might seem a little loose to keep a hand that explodes out of the gates and is really functional and goes wide but doesn't have, a top end, we have 17 top end cards that are very relevant in the matchup to draw to. And more broadly, I'm not counting Priest of Titania and Wellwisher in that category, and in other matchups, they would also count too, right? You could maybe even count Thermokarst as a tempo card here that would be a really relevant draw. So we have a lot of really relevant draws, but we are dependent upon finding them. And the draw of Forest off the top is our literal worst draw, so definitely thus far not rewarded. But hey, it's turn 2, we got 5 bodies down. We've got all the mana we could need. Let's see if it's good enough. And opponent's done nothing for the first 2 turns, just playing a bounce land and pitching a Seagate Oracle. Sadly, as much as I love these beautiful Elf Treehouse Invasion forests, they are the last thing we want to see. So definitely got some wide open windows to Elf Ball here, or even just to draw more dorks and continue along the go wide plan, but the deck is not complying, and opponent will go turn 3, Sunscape Familiar into Snap, untapping their Karoo land and their island, into another Snap for another untap, and now they've got 5 mana, reduced to play with, so they cast a 4-mana Muldrifter, still have 1 land open. Hardcast Muldrifter, not evoke. So a completely nutty turn for the opponent, one that really lines up especially well against what we were doing. And we draw Lead the Stampede off the top. Now that's a good draw, but note how much better it would be. I would feel very favored, actually, if we had had this on our first or second draw step, despite how good the opponent's turn 3 was. So this has come a little bit perhaps too late, but we test the waters against permission by redeploying the stuff they know about. And then, thanks to the power of Birchlore Rangers, we do get to play and resolve a Lead the Stampede. It's just kind of finding more dorks, but hey, it's a refuel. We get to deploy almost everything off of the Quirion Ranger, Birchlore Ranger combo as well. So we're just going wide, making the opponent have some good stuff after their really strong turn. They will go Preordain, I believe this went top-bottom, and then they'll pass, and we just rip another forest off the top. You do hate to see it. We'll begin with Sylvan Ranger. I want to do this before attacks because, I don't want them to have permission for this, so certainly if they're leery of something else, if we've got all of our elves untapped, they might just let Ranger resolve. And at this point, that's the best we got, so getting it down is relevant. Then we turn them all sideways. I don't know why the opponent doesn't block here with Sunscape Familiar. Maybe they're just being extra cautious and they can't afford to lose it. I don't know. But we get a free extra point of damage in. The opponent's at 9. We have 8 power on board, so, their blockers are going to start really adding up, but maybe we can force our way over the line. But to do that, we've got to fade the opponent having something great here. And they've got their best card, which is Stonehorn Dignitary in this spot. Muldrifter comes back off the top, and then the flood continues. So sometimes, guys, even when you're on a 14-land deck like we are, all you can do is flood, and I'm pretty sure I scooped. Yeah, I just scooped to that. I'm just not going to get there in the face of that flood against a Tron opponent. That's Tron. Sorry, it's not Tron. It's Blue-White Flicker. They've got all the lands they need. They've got Stonehorn Dignitary. They're going to have 5 cards in hand. There's no way. There's no way. So I do just concede to that. Feels bad, man. But that is how we lost a lot of the games in this league. I'm not going to lie. One of the reason the content was not great in its original live recorded form is because we ran into a lot of matchups like this, and we lost all of them except for the one I showed you against Tron. I believe I lost twice to Blue-White Flicker and twice to Tron over the course of 2 leagues. So we played half of our matches were against Ghostly Flicker decks, and the one I just showed you was against the opponent who was the most seemingly competent, the most seemingly experienced and quick with all of their mechanics and quick to demonstrate the loop. Every other loss, guys, that I experienced, the opponent was down to like 3 minutes or less on the clock. It was insane. It was just really feel-bad losses and really not great content because we have no agency in those situations, and the opponent's just really slowly killing us, and we're almost getting there, but they kill us with like 2 minutes left on the clock. It happened a lot in these 2 leagues, and that's part of why I decided to present the replay instead. Alright guys, so the last match I'm going to show you is actually not from these 2 leagues at all, and you know why? Because one of the weird things about the leagues is what I just explained, that we ran into 5 of 10 Ghostly Flicker decks, and they all ended that way, except for the one we won. And again, they were very, very slow to reach their conclusion. But another reason the league was weirdly not representative of Elves is in all 10 matches, so let's say probably 25 games, I did not cast or even have in hand, besides maybe having to mull it away once or twice, a single Distant Melody, which is truly bizarre. And Distant Melody is the highest upside card and in many ways the most fun card in this entire deck, right? So I'm showing you for the 5th round here a tournament practice lobby match where Distant Melody is something that we actually see and get to use, because I want to give you the full spectrum of the elf experience. So we are against some kind of a Thornwood Falls deck. some kind of a go-long deck that's willing to play these ETB tapped life gain lands. And we have a bit of a slow start, just going Fyndhorn into Priest of Titania. Not disastrously slow, but not that explosive either. Opponent with more life gain off of Kabira Crossroads, so it's Bant something or other. And once again, we continue to have a pretty slow progression, but the power of Priest allows us to go Vanguard into Timberwatch Elves, so even though we're not having the second land drop, we don't have any kind of Quirion Ranger loop or anything like that, Priest of Titania still really pulling its weight, as admittedly is Fyndhorn Elves. An opponent just playing tap lands and saying go is definitely something that we like to see, but of course, we do fear the worst with a deck like that they're going to be on another Flicker, Stonehorn Dignitary style deck, but let's try to Elf Ball until such time as that happens, and we'll do so by leading off with Lys Alana Huntmaster, as we're known to do, and having a pretty decent go-wide turn. Elvish Vanguard is a nice big 5/5, and before damage, it becomes an even nicer and even bigger, I guess that was an 11/11, so we knocked them down from 23 to 12, and wouldn't you know it, our best friend, Stonehorn Dignitary. I guess that's another card that I've seen people complain about along with Ghostly Flicker. Again, you guys let me know what you think, if anything, needs to be done about these cards in the format. I am simply too new to have an informed opinion, but I am going to play some Elf Ball here, and we are going to kick off on Lead the Stampede. So why do we kick off on Lead? Well, basically, what I'm hoping for is to find some way to beat Stonehorn Dignitary, which for me in the main deck is usually Viridian Longbow, and to that end, we want to lead the Stampede into either Sylvan Ranger or Birchlore Ranger so we can make blue mana. So we're rewarded for this. Not only do we have a nice 3 mana draw for with a ton of mana to play with, we also hit the aforementioned Birchlore Rangers off of the lead. So that was the exact plan. And we do still have the luxury to go Huntmaster into Essence Warden and just get like max value before we start really going off, because we have a second Priest of Titania that we're using here, right? And also this is going to, the wider we go, the bigger our distant melody is going to be. So note all the amazing synergies. We're just making 2 tokens every time we cast an elf. Those 2 tokens, if we needed them to, which we really don't, can then tap to add mana. So basically every single spell we cast at the lower end of the curve at least is completely free, with Birchlore Ranger synergizing with all these free tokens from the Huntmaster. Our Vanguard is getting disgustingly big. We're gaining a ton of life off of Essence Warden. This is just Elf Ball if I have ever seen it. And then that's not even where it ends. We just go for a nice casual distant melody here. And we could have cast other elves first too, right? But I think this is good enough. What did we just draw? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, draw 15. Now, it's worth pointing out that in some cases you will not actually want to draw that many cards, and you can name Warrior or Druid or maybe some other thing based on your exact board state. Always keep that in mind, but in this case I'm just trying to basically find Viridian Longbow, and we do. We've got another distant melody too, so there's nothing we don't have, and again, the lack of distant melodies at all in the league was very bizarre in the 2 leagues, and that's why I wanted to show you this. So I'm just going to hit play. If you want to slow down and really parse out how I sequenced, you can do that, but we are just casting basically a bunch of, all of these 1-drops are ramping us in context of Birchlore Rangers and Lys Alana Huntmaster, and then the idea is that we just pass the Longbow around. I don't know what actually would be better here to do, whether it would be ideal to shoot down the Stonehorn Dignitary so they can't flicker it, or to just ignore it and start pinging them. I'm not exactly sure. Either way, this turn we have too many summoning sick creatures, so we didn't necessarily have the ability to do more than ping. It shows me equipping Nettle Sentinel. That's the best equipped target, but this is a summoning sick one, so I'm not sure what happened there. But either way, the opponent, once we start moving the bow around, is just simply going to scoop, because that is our win condition in the face of these fog effects and these effects that shut down our combat phase. We're on the draw here for game 2. Our opponent will mulligan, and so will we. We have a 1-lander with no 1-drop. Cannot really be kept in my view. And then we mulligan to a 6-lander that's kind of similar to the one that didn't get us there in the league against the blue-white Flicker deck, because it has all of the mana, but none of the payoffs, right? But once again, I do think these are justifiable for reasons I have already outlined, and I bottom one of the forests. Partially because it'll be nice to have this island around. We don't have Birchlore Rangers. If we draw Distant Melody, I want to be able to cast that. Maybe some sideboard cards as well. And also, the awkwardness of Island is not necessarily that relevant to our early progressions because we have Quirion Ranger in hand. So, opponent will lead on the Crossroads, and we will draw Essence Warden. Any 1-drops at this point are fairly welcome, right? Opponent will explore off of forests into an island. And then we find Lead the Stampede, which is all well and good, but we are first developing our board, doing the Quirion Ranger Elvish Mystic Forest loop, and following up with a Priest of Titania, gaining some life that probably isn't really that relevant, but hey, again, the nice thing about Essence Warden, even it's just a one-of, but you saw how great she was in the aggro matchups that I showed you. And even when her life gain is not especially relevant, just having a critical mass of 1-drops for go-off moments in the early turns, definitely really nice. Opponent, speaking of going off, is ramping like crazy over there with back-to-back Explorers into an evoked Muldrifter, refilling the hand a bit, setting up for the following turn. And we draw another 1-drop in the form of Birchlore Rangers, but the more important thing here is Lead the Stampede, which we go for. Sadly, it's a bit of a brick. We, again, in an eerie parallel to the previous situation, we only hit 2 cards off of it, and it is just more of the same. But hey, going wide is something. Going wide is definitely something. So thus far, we've managed to find 1 payoff, and it hasn't really paid off. We will just have to see what we can come up with and what the opponent's got, and there it is again. Stonehorn Dignitary, our old nemesis, and boom, what do we get off the top? Distant Melody. You know what? Why couldn't I draw like this in the league? I'm kind of nut drawing off the top in the tournament practice lobby. In the league, in this situation, it's like, hey, do you want 7 forests? Because we can give you 7 forests, right? But hey, we'll take it anyway. It's still fun. Elf ball moments, even if it's not for any real stakes here. Distant Melody was a draw 8 or whatever it just was, and among those 8 is once again Viridian Longbow. So now it's time to use the power of Nettle Sentinel and Birchlore Rangers to cast a bunch of free 1-drops, basically. And then from there, Quirion Ranger, Viridian Longbow, the real payoff card, and get the Timberwatch Elf down, because why not? We've got the mana to spare. Time to start moving this Longbow around and pinging. Again, I don't have the experience to say whether it's better to ping the opponent or to ping the Stonehorn Dignitary. If you guys have an opinion there, you can definitely let me know. But we get our pinging in, even in the face of the Dignitary, and they play Mnemonic Wall. And Mnemonic Wall is going to buy back Explorer. Then they'll ephemerate the Stonehorn Dignitary. In response, we'll just use the Quirion Ranger for another point of damage, but that makes me think that maybe I should have shot down the Dignitary. Again, I am not certain. We've drawn a Timberwatch Elf, so it's time to just start moving it around. It's nice to ping for free with Nettle Sentinel before you cast your green spell, because of course then you get a free untap here, but the opponent is not interested in watching us pass the Longbow around through our army of elves, and they just concede to that, maybe not really having a realistic out to the Longbow plan, and that is awesome. That is really, really fun. So one of the things that I'll touch on in the wrap-up is that some people are playing a second or even third Longbow in the side for matchups just like this. I didn't really like that at first, but again, maybe I should just be listening to more experienced players. One of the reasons I didn't like that is because against the flying decks, which we didn't really see in the games I showed you here, I like bringing in Scattershot Archer and Lys Alana Bowmaster better than bringing in a second Longbow, because they are less conditional, they're less clunky, and they help the elf ball plan. And so my reasoning was, if we don't have the need for additional help via Longbow in those anti-flying matchups, then maybe it's better to play Thermokarsts over Longbow if we're just looking at something that's strictly good against Tron and other Flicker decks. That was my thinking anyway. Again, maybe I'm off base with this, but hey, Thermokarst was really good in the one game we did manage to win against Tron. Alright guys, so that was our kind of unconventional Donation League mashup of matchups. Let's be clear, mashup of matchups in the name of Mark-Andre Kurasinski, a wonderful supporter who gave me carte blanche to choose whatever I wanted to play for the Donation League that his support had qualified him for, and this is what I brought to you. Again, as I said in the beginning and as I said throughout, I did play 2 leagues. They were both live recorded, and they were both going to be terrible content because the games that we lost just went so long, we had such little agency in them, and the opponents killed us with like under 3 minutes left on the clock in basically every loss except the one that I showed you. So it was not good content. I hope the kind of repackaged, repurposed content that I just brought you here was much more enjoyable than the live recorded stuff would have been. However, I don't want to sugarcoat it. We actually didn't do that well on the debut leagues. We went 2-3 in both of them. Not a disastrous result, but not exactly setting the world on fire either. But I have to say that even though we had a lot of pretty good variants in the wins that I showed you, we really had a lot of bad variants in the ones that I lost. We had it seemingly, again, besides that Tron deck that we did manage to win, every other Ghostly Flicker deck was just keeping really good 7s, like the perfect 7 from my perspective, from what I could tell, every single game. And despite that, we had them on the ropes, we had windows to draw the stuff that we needed, and it just never quite came together for us. We had consistently bad top decks. The wrong half of the deck problem was major in those matchups in particular. And the other non-Flicker deck matchup that I lost was against Bogles, where they were really binary games. And on the play, Game 1 and Game 3, they played Turn 1 Deathblade Elite, which is a 1/1 with Provoke, forcing a creature of the opponent's choice to untap and block Deathblade Elite if they want to. So I can't beat that card. Not with a setup, I really can't beat that card unless they just, like, don't have an aura. The best I could probably hope to do is, like, do nothing until I can play multiple spells all out at once on, like, turn 3, but that's just so bad. And if the Bogles curve-outs are good and aggressive, which they were, it's just not good enough. So I used to have a gut shot in here for my first ever iteration of the deck, my first ever testing. I did miss the gut shot, specifically in that matchup, specifically to kill Deathblade Elite. Now, they won't always have it on the play, right? But you can see how adding a card like this to the sideboard could be relevant in the mirror, could be relevant against Delver and Fairy decks, and could definitely save your bacon against a Deathblade Elite that otherwise is just going to totally shut you down. So we had some awesome moments here, and that's why I wanted to make a league out of the gameplay that I did go through. But I've got to be honest, the bad feels were so bad. It was like worse than Modern to lose at the very end of very long matches over and over to the Flicker decks. And it was also pretty annoying to lose to Bogles like that, I'm not gonna lie. In the tournament practice lobby, there's a lot of more interesting back and forth with, like, Delver decks and with other interactive decks. You know, Black Control is a pretty cool matchup that seems relatively even, maybe favored for the Elves, honestly. Other, like, Boros decks, maybe slightly favored for them, but again, still an interesting matchup. But, like, the games that I play, and I tried twice to get, like, a really enjoyable league for you, didn't happen. So instead, we've got this. But anyway, my friends, hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think, as always, about the Elf build and all the other things I brought up in the course of the league, like the state of Pauper, what you think about the Flicker decks, whether they need a ban, and all the rest. I'm left wondering about Thermokarst too. Had a pretty feel-good moment with it, not gonna lie, but it still might not be correct to play. I could see playing, like, I don't really know why people don't play a second Relic. Almost nobody does. Seems like a pretty decent potentiality to me. You know, other considerations would, of course, be a second Longbow or a card like Harsh Sustenance, I think is what it's called. Let's try to find this. I think I own one. And some people would sideboard this, but I would actually be inclined to just try to main deck it because it's going to be a good game one finisher anyway, because most people can't handle the wide board. But, a one of like this plus a second longbow, if I'm not thermokarsting against the Flicker decks, I probably need to up my count of alternative win conditions that don't care about fogs or Stonehorn dignitaries especially. So things to think about, right? In terms of what to cut, I don't know. We had some great moments with Gleeful Sabotage. We didn't really need Spidersilk Armor and Weather the Storm, but that's simply because we didn't play against red decks. If we're against red, Burn is a bad matchup, despite 3 Wellwisher main and Essence Warden main. I'm still kind of unfavored there, I think. Harsh Sustenance would definitely be some help there, but Weather the Storm is probably a necessary hate card unless you're hoping to just dodge burn. And against Electrickery decks, we probably need Spidersilk Armor, but, playing this card is a bit of a feel-bad, right? So it's tough. It's tough to figure out the optimal sideboard. I guess that's why they all look different, right? So this was me trying my best and also trying something new, but I'm definitely willing to hear any and all thoughts and suggestions here. I'll play more Elves in the future, and I'll play more Pauper in the future, but as always, my play on the channel will be overwhelmingly dictated by your response. So if I'm getting a lot of views on Pauper, a lot of positive feedback, a good thumbs up ratio, all that stuff, then I'll be more inclined to play it. If the Pauper content is languishing in like 3-digit views and people aren't that thrilled about it, then, maybe I won't play it as much. So you guys, if you do like the content, please make your voice heard. Please do all the stuff I like to see. Subscribe, thumbs up, leave a comment, all that good stuff. Thank you once again to Mark, and thank you once again to Staffin Genemo, our newest Inquisitor, and to Zachary, our newest Confidant. I don't know if the next time I play Pauper, maybe it will be for a donation league if somebody's got one coming up that loves Pauper. If it's not for that, I don't know, maybe it will be Elves again, maybe it will be Burn. I have still been messing around with Burn a little bit, and frankly, with the matchups I had with these leagues, Burn might have done us a little bit better, right? So we'll have to see how all that goes. But you guys let me know what you want to see, and we'll see what we can do to accommodate it. Finally, I do want to play Mono Black at some point in Pauper, but for learning the format, I think the linear decks, the aggressive decks, the ones that are more obvious to pilot, and also the games go more quickly, that's kind of where I want to be for now. But eventually, if Pauper's popular, I'll branch into Mono Black as well. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. We got some spicy modern stuff coming up. I think our next donation league is going to be a Jund Field of the Dead list. So it's going to be basically classical Jund, but with a non-traditional top end involving Field of the Dead as a major win condition, in conjunction with Tireless Tracker, Ren and 6, of course, fueling all of this, and Hour of Promise, all alongside Field of the Dead and a utility land base. Should be really, really different and pretty cool. So I hope you will stick around for that, and I hope you are all doing well out there. Stay safe, be well, and I will talk to you soon. Hope everybody out there has a wonderful day.